Ryan Atkinson, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
Thanks, John. Great to be here.
Yeah, no, it's great to be with you, and I want to hear all about Core Resources. So this was a company that you started in the staffing industry.
Correct.
And I'd love to, kind of describe the business model to folks. I understand you supplied staff to mostly banks and other financial institutions who were doing IT projects. Am I getting that roughly right?
Yeah, that's right. Essentially, we would be a just-in-time partner for mostly major banks. Those were our big clients, although we did have a bit of breadth beyond the banks. And so what would happen is, big financial institutions would basically have projects under development. They wouldn't have enough full-time resources, so they need to augment the work with time and materials, temporary staff. So that's where we came into play, and we would be able to provide them with contract resources for anywhere from 3 to 6 month to 3 to 5 year durations. And so it was kind of a residual business that once we placed these resources on site at the clients, the effect of the business model is we would charge the client an hourly rate. We would pay the candidate an hourly rate, and there would be margin in there built in for us. And we would manage the onboarding, offboarding, payroll. They would effectively be our employee for the duration.
What kind of margin did you make between like what you charged the bank and what you paid the employee?
It was roughly in the neighborhood of 18%, I would think, on average is about right. So if you can imagine like $100 bill rate for a client, we'd be paying the candidate anywhere between $80 to sometimes $90 an hour. And then the difference between that would be our margin.
Amazing. And so why wouldn't the bank, if I'm Royal Bank or BMO or whomever, why wouldn't the bank just hire the person directly? Like if they have a need, why wouldn't they just hire that person rather than hiring a staffing firm?
Well, I guess what we give them is flexibility and flexible workforce. If the banks hire people directly as a full-time employee, for instance, there's all sorts of obligations they have, and bringing them on board and offboarding them is not an easy process. So we provide that flexibility, and then there's also the risk if a contract, even if they hire them as a contractor directly, if the contractor stays at that employer for any length of time, there's what's called co-employment risk, where the CRA could come in and say, you know what, this is not a temporary relationship. This is an employee relationship. And one of the advantages to being a contractor is you get to basically incorporate yourself and effectively run as your own business. So a lot of the IT folks that we were placing were incorporated entities, and basically we were just brokering the relationship between their corporation and the end client, which was the bank in this case. And it keeps that level of separation and protection for both parties.
It's it's refreshing for me to hear this business, because I know it's not simple. I'm sure it was a very, very difficult business to run, but on the surface, it sounds so simple, right? You hire, smart IT people, and you say, look, we'll place you and take a little cut for our trouble. And then we'll go to the banks who need temporary IT staff to spin up a new CRM system or whatever, and say, hey, if you don't want to hire a full-time person, we've got some people. Like it
is simple.
Like in a world where like AI is busting everything up, and like it's just like a nice, simple business. Like I get it.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's simple business, but not easy business. Because your product is people, and people, you can't place too many guarantees on people because they're going to do what they want to do. And unlike selling a widget where you can stand behind the project and say, I guarantee this product's going to do this, people oftentimes will surprise you. And so there's a lot of situations that come up that you have to deal with. And, it can be stressful at times when you're managing relationships between two parties. And so that's sort of where we come in, is managing that and greasing the tracks and making sure everything runs smoothly and keeping it together. So.
And I understand that you had a unique relationship with your business partner. And I think a lot of our our audience will be interested to learn about that dynamic. So just kind of walk me through your partnership with your business partner.
Sure. So my partner, Keith, we started Core in 2017. And Keith and I's relationship went back at least 5 years before that. We had Keith had worked for me. I hired him at my first company, which I sold in 2014, called Redwood Global. It was also a staffing company. Keith was one of our top employees at the time. and just somebody I looked to as a leader internally, and somebody I thought had a really bright future ahead. When we sold that business, both of us went along to the acquirer in 2014, which was at that time the largest staffing firm in Canada. Keith might have spent about 6 months there. I might have spent about a year and a half. We parted ways, and Keith went off and worked for a large company for a while, but we kept in loose touch. And he came to me in 2016 and said, "Hey, I have an idea, and I want to do this, and I want you as my partner." And it was essentially to launch Core, which was his brainchild, and he came to me with a business plan, and it looked really good. So I thought, I wasn't planning on jumping back into the staffing business, but here was an opportunity to partner with somebody I had a lot of respect for, and I knew was a great worker and a great leader. And so we sort of made a deal, and the deal I said was, Keith, I'm not sure I have the fortitude to go back all in full time, because it's a stressful business. As you know, I run the Redwood Global for almost 8 years, and I was ready to take a break. So here's the deal. I'll de-risk it for you. I'll put up the capital. I'll take all the upfront risk. I'll help you to brand the business, grow the business, hire a team, get all the pieces in place. But day to day, you're going to run it. We're going to pay you a nice salary to do that. I won't take any money out. I'll just, get my money on the back end through dividends and potentially a future exit. And he said, "Okay, that's a deal." And it worked really, really well. We built a beautiful company that, we were able to successfully have an exit from earlier this year.
Hey, it's John. Look, if you're building to sell, I want to let you know about a resource you may find helpful. It's called the Value Builder Score, and it will evaluate your company in the same way that acquirers will look at your business. It'll give you a score on the 8 factors that drive the value of your company. You'll also get an estimate of value and things you could do to improve that value over time, whether you want to sell now or in a decade from now. Knowing how the movie ends, I think, puts you in the catbird's seat, gives you all kinds of negotiating leverage. So it's available exclusively through a Value Builder advisor. So talk to your advisor. If you don't have one yet, you can go to valuebuilder.com/score. Let us know what industry you're in, and we will connect you with an advisor who specializes in companies like yours. Just go to valuebuilder.com/score. I got so many questions about this because, again, this is like the panacea for a lot of our listeners, right? Like, have a partner, maybe a little younger, all the energy in the world, and you can kind of just ride shotgun and be the kind of financier. So I got a ton of questions. Okay, so first, how did you figure out the equity split? You said that you brought the capital. Mm-hmm. So how did you figure out the equity?
We just kept it very simple. We were going to be 50-50 partners. Again, I would inject the initial capital to get all the office and systems and everything up and running. And also, as we grew, I mean, when you're running contract resources, you're paying these folks a month or 2 months of their pay before you get paid. So
right, okay,
yeah. So there's a lot of capital investment that goes into building a business, and I never wanted that to be a constraint on our growth. Was hey, we don't have enough money to keep adding contractors. So fortunately, my first exit was pretty solid, and I had some dry powder. So I was just, I have money that's sitting in the stock market, but I'd much rather invest it into building this business. So as we needed it, I just kept on funneling money over to finance the growth of Core. And
did you take more and more equity as you brought more and more money over?
No, I did not do that, but I did charge an interest fee on the money. Like, it wasn't just dead money sitting there to finance the growth. I charged a nominal interest rate. So I was getting a return on that investment, from an investment standpoint, on that capital. But, also I was realizing 50% of the equity of that business. So all the dividends that we were able to generate were shared equally.
I'd be curious to know, first of all, how much capital did you have to put in to get the office set up and the computers and stuff like that? And then how big a check were you writing to the company? Like, did this get into the 7 figures kind of?
It did. Initially it was probably just over $100,000, to be honest.
Yeah.
And that was, we started to become cash flow positive fairly quickly. I mean, it's a not a super capital intensive business to start. I mean, you need a computer, a phone, and some payroll to fund for the resources. But beyond that, there's not a lot of capital expenses. So that's the good news about it. But yeah, we added some, consistently started adding contractors pretty much right out of the gate. So in addition to the funding of the contractors we were placing, in addition to a salary for my partner, Keith, because he obviously had his expenses he needed to fund. And then we started to hire salespeople and growth. So I'd say the most amount of money I injected into the company was probably within the first 2.5 years. And at that point, I was in for close to 2 million.
Wow. Okay. That's a big nut.
Yeah, it was. And so, but I knew it was the bulk of that was to fund our contractor headcount who were actively working on assignment at the major banks. So it was safe money because the banks always, paid their bills. So I knew it wasn't too risky. And, yeah, it was a setup that worked really well for both parties because I brought elements to the equation that Keith needed, and he brought things to the equation that I needed. So we both knew our roles and stayed in our lanes, and it really worked well.
With regards to the legal agreement between you and Keith, was it a shotgun agreement? Did you have preferred rights to get your money out before in the event of, like, how did you structure it legally?
We had a shotgun agreement. Any loans to the company I made were documented. I mean, I would get those paid out obviously first.
Top of the cap table.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Got it.
It's very straightforward.
So that was pretty buttoned up.
Yeah.
That's super helpful. How did you think about Keith's salary? Again, a lot of our listeners would be, have contemplated the idea of bringing in a 2IC. So I know Keith was a 50-50 partner, so not exactly the same thing, but they've heard things like, if I sell my business, maybe I'll get a few times EBITDA. But if I bring in like a really smart guy like Keith or gal to run the business, maybe I can just carve off the dividends. The challenge or the question I think that they often have is like, how do I properly compensate them as the business grows? Exactly. So how did you think through that with Keith?
Yeah, that's a good question. The way I looked at it with Keith is I told Keith he had to wear two hats. There was Keith, the owner, and then Keith, the manager. And so when we were talking about, Keith, the manager, I'd sit down with Keith, the owner, and say, okay, Keith, owner, how is Keith doing as manager? What's the scope of his responsibility this year? Has he done a good job? Is his salary fair? Where are we at with Keith, the manager? How do you think he feels about his compensation? And we'd have a discussion about that. And he would, it was generally always very amicable. But yeah, we wanted to make sure that his pay package as a manager was aligned with the goals we had as owners. And so we developed a compensation plan that really, it gave him a reasonable base salary, but it also compensated him as a percentage of profits. So we eventually got to an equation that was sort of, here's your base salary, plus you're going to get 5% of all profits, all EBITDA over X amount threshold. So it incentivized him in his manager role to really grow the business and be rewarded for that. But at the same time, as owners, we were sharing in that growth as well through dividends.
Yeah. I'd be curious, as you grew the business, were you able to start declaring dividends? Because as you described, it was cash thirsty, right? You're hiring the contracts, you're paying them, and then you're waiting 60 days to get paid by the bank, or 90 days or whatever. Were you able to start pulling some dividends out, or was it just keep putting it in?
We didn't pull a dividend until probably year 4 or 5. Yeah, it was okay. It was cash intensive, and that was a good thing. It was a good problem to have because I knew the more cash that it needed, the more profits we were going to generate. So it was a pretty simple math equation. But eventually, we got to a point where we, instead of the hockey stick growth of, 100% growth year over year, we started to taper off to 20% growth and 15% growth as we got into the advanced stages. And at that point, the profits were such that we could then start to peel back some dividends. So for the last, 3.5 years, we were taking dividends, not on necessarily a scheduled basis. Just we'd look at the cash in the accounts and say, we've got a surplus here. Let's take a divvy. And so that's how we did it. It was not super formalized.
You mentioned you each stayed in your lane, and I think that's notionally interesting. Of course, the devil's always in the details. How did you? I mean, we've had so many partnership eruptions and disputes on this show. Oftentimes, they start out great, and they start to get challenging. One of the challenges, to be brutally honest, is like the guy or gal who's doing all the work, in this case Keith, kind of turns up sometime along the way and goes, hold on a second. Like, I'm busting my ass here. I'm working 50, 60 hours a week. You're cutting dividend checks and this isn't working for me anymore. Yeah. Like, did you ever run into stuff like that where you're like, okay, like they forgot the original founding concept?
It's funny because before we inked our shareholders agreement, when we were first talking about it, I said to Keith, Keith, listen, here's what's happening. I'm taking all the upfront risk. I'm putting all this capital in to get this off the ground. So my risk is now. So because of that, I don't want a situation 5 years from now when we're a lot bigger than probably you even think we're going to be, because I think we're going to be big. I don't want any bitterness, you coming back and saying, you know what, Ryan, I did all the heavy lifting. You just sat back and collected checks. And if that's going to be a possibility, let's just not do it, because I don't want to have that awkward discussion. And he said to me, he looked me in the eye and said, I promise you that won't happen. You're making this possible for both of us. And so I'll be forever indebted and grateful for that. And he held his word. And there were times where I felt a little guilty because, again, I wasn't in it every day, all day.
Yeah.
But he was getting a fair compensation for it. And I always said, if there's a point in time at which you feel you're burning out, like, we can hire somebody externally and you can just step back and we can both have the same role as owners. So it was always an option for him if he felt that it was getting too much. But he's the kind of guy who he wants to be in there and have control, and that's, I think, what's made it so successful. He's very hands-on, very engaged, and he was just a wonderful business partner to have, and it was a great ride we had together. So very few, if any, disagreements along the way. We were always very good with communication and making sure, checking in with each other, and is this fair? Are you feeling good? Like, I just wanted to make sure there was no ever underlying resentment building on either side. And I think that good communication is key to that. You have to sit down and, pick up the phone and talk to each other, once, twice, several times a week, and just check in and see how everything's going and be there for each other. So, did
you have any sort of rhythm for those meetings? Did you follow sort of a daily huddle or any sort of?
We had a weekly check-in scheduled, like 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, I think it was, and so we'd sit there and reconvene about what's gone on in the last week. But of course, situations may come up on either side where we'd touch base, but we were always just a phone call away. He had a regular cadence with the team, like 2 meetings a day. Like, we went after COVID, we went almost fully virtual. So, communication on Zoom calls was basically the way to do it. So they had multiple calls a day as a team to make sure that team unity was still intact and didn't fray apart. So,
were you ever tempted to get more involved?
To some extent. There were certain times where I wanted to get more involved, but I always, part of my commitment to Keith was to defer to him, because he was the de facto leader and the team knew him as the leader. I was always sort of in the background. It was kind of it was a good dynamic because the team kind of knew who I was, but they didn't know me that well. So, if Keith wanted to lay down the law and sort of play the heavy, he could use me as the reason in the background. It's like, Ray, Ryan wants it this way, so don't shoot the messenger. Meanwhile, we would, obviously we would have had many discussions about these things before. And so it was
like Robin Masters and Magnum PI. You're like behind the speakerphone.
That's right. So, no, it worked. It worked well, and I generally stayed out of his way because he was doing such a wonderful job. And so, I didn't have too many reasons to get overly involved and micromanage anything.
It sounds like you left some meat on the bone, right? Like you fairly compensated him. You gave him a percentage of the profits. He had 50, like there, you were generous as well. And so I think you probably acknowledged that as you went through. Did you have the vision from the beginning that you were building to sell? I mean, did you and Keith sit down and say, let's build this thing to sell? You did it with Redwood. Now let's do it again here. Or was there a different goal?
No, we didn't discuss selling when we started it. I personally wanted to have this as a long-term play. I had an exit already under my belt. I'd sort of locked in a lifestyle that was good for me. And frankly, I enjoyed cash flow. I love the dividends that come from, the annuities that come from owning a business. I found that when I sold my first business and, the cash stops coming in, you start to get a little kind of frugal and you get into this sort of scarcity mindset where it's like, I don't want to see this start to shrink. I mean, that's trouble. So I really enjoyed having the continuous cash flow coming in. And so I wasn't overly keen to sell, but I was always open to it. Keith, who had not had an exit under his belt, was in a different situation than I was. Obviously, young family. He just built a big house. He had some bills to pay. And so I think the attraction was probably a little stronger for him. And again, I had committed to him that if the day came where he wanted to exit, that I would support that, even if in my heart I was kind of hoping we'd hang on a little longer.
Any sense at that time of what a staffing company trades for, like kind of multiples?
So we didn't actively go to market. We were a known entity as we grew over the 7-8 years we were in business. And so we got on the radar of people. There's a lot of M&A that happens in the industry. So we started getting some phone calls in, 2022, 2023. And, the numbers we were being floated were somewhere between 6 and 7 times EBITDA. Mm-hmm. And so that was sort of the anchor point we'd latched onto as sort of what we thought was a going rate.
And where are you in EBITDA at this point, or revenue, or whatever you want to share in terms of size?
We were clipping in. I mean, in 2022, 2023, we were over 30 million in revenue, close to 35 million in revenue, running an EBITDA of about 8%.
Got it. Okay. So you're in the kind of two and change EBITDA. Yeah. Got it. So this is a real business. This is a significant business with real value for sure. And it seems like you're getting that sign from the marketplace with inbound inquiries from people.
Yes.
Was there a triggering event of some sort that made it go from kind of just receiving inbound to something more serious?
It's funny. It's kind of an organic process that takes, if you're planning to sell your business, you need to, I think, go into it with the mindset it's going to take a year or more, at least, from initial conversation to closing and signing of the final sale purchase agreement. So we'd had some people kind of court us along the way. One was a big Canadian company. In fact, the one we were really leaning towards was the first one that we talked to, and they were based out of Quebec. And we'd had a number of conversations with them. They'd flown in to see us a few times. We'd done a lot of sort of soft diligence on each other for several months. And they were the front runner. They were the only player, and we were kind of getting warm and close to a deal with them. And it got down to sort of short strokes. And then the other party that ended up buying us came out of the weeds. And so we thought, hey, well, here's another buyer. We may as well get two parties talking to us at the same time. That would only help our negotiation skills, we thought. So we started engaging with the folks out of the US, and boy, they moved a lot quicker. And maybe that's a cultural difference, I think, between US and Canada. It feels like the Americans, and I've heard this anecdotally, I haven't done a lot of business down there, but I hear they're just ready to do deals and like, let's go, let's move this along, and really a lot more urgency in the process than Canadians who are, I guess, notoriously more conservative. And that was certainly the case here. So, even though we'd been talking to this Canadian company for a year, the Americans put an LOI in front of us within, a month and a half. And it was pretty good. And my partner Keith and I, we looked at each other and I said, you know what, this is pretty solid. So we thought, okay, we'll go ahead with it. And so we verbally said, okay, we're gonna sign this. Just give us a couple of days, but yeah, we're on board. And then we told the Canadian company that we've been talking to for over a year. We said, hey, I just wanted to give you the heads up that we're going ahead with another party, and we're sorry, but it's just not going to work out. And they hit the roof. They couldn't believe this was happening. They said, whoa, don't sign anything. Hold on. We'll get back to you. Give us 24 hours. Just don't do anything. I was like, okay, I've kind of given a verbal commitment here. I don't want to go back on my word, but okay, we'll stall out just to see what you come up with. And sure enough, they came back with an offer that was significantly higher than we were talking about with them. And it was considerably higher than the offer we'd had from the Americans. And so we thought, wow, okay, this is intriguing. I feel bad because I didn't want to create a sort of a bidding war here between the two parties, but here we are in this situation, and we got to do what's right for us and for the company. And full disclosure, we wanted to make sure that our staff were going to be taken care of either way, and we'd had a lot of discussions with both parties, and because we wanted to make sure that the team was going to remain, come out of this in as good or better shape than they were currently in. And both parties assured us of that. But the dollars and cents were just quite large on the Canadian side. So we went back to the Americans and said, hey, I know I said yes, but this company we've been talking to for a year just came back with something that's, over the top. So we're going to go with them. I'm not even going to tell you what it is because I don't want to get this into a back and forth. I'm just going to politely say thanks for everything, but we're going to go down this path. And so we said, if anything changes, we'll get back to you. And that was that. So we signed the LOI with the Canadian company.
How much more on a percentage basis was the Quebec company versus the first offer from the US one?
On an upfront dollar value, it was maybe 10% more, but they had a real attractive sort of earnout program that I guess extended out longer than the 2 years we currently have. But the milestones were considerable, and Keith still had lots of gas in the tank, so he was happy to stay on and sort of achieve those. So looking at it in its entirety, the package was, I would say, if everything came to fruition, it would have been about 30% higher than the one that the Americans put forward. So,
and are we still in the 6 to 7 times EBITDA range? Is that sort of where we're living at this point, or?
I think we're definitely getting a lot higher now because again, it required Keith to stay on and manage the business through. So when you got all the earnout components built in, it was pushing up in the 10, 11 range. So attractive numbers for sure. And so we thought it made sense. And so that was what we decided to do. So we signed the LOI and we got down the path, and, we'd been talking to them for a year, and we kept impeccable books. And I'd certainly say that that's an important aspect. If your books aren't clean and you've got skeletons in the closet, you're not going to be ready to sell. And I learned from my first exit just how important it was to have all those elements buttoned down properly, because it just makes the diligence process a lot easier and keeps your negotiation position strong as well. But we got down the process, and they started digging into, we had about 400 consultants out working in the field for us at this time. And they were a strategic buyer in the sense that they were a privately held IT professional services company, and they were going to go public or get acquired themselves at some point. So they were looking for tuck-ins to sort of build out their business. But a significant component of our resource mix out on the market were what they considered non-IT. And I guess they weren't IT. They were more sort of help desk kind of customer service analyst type folks. And so once they discovered that, they realized, well, they're private equity board members said, this doesn't help with our story. We're selling our company as an IT services company, and here we're buying a company that only 70% of their resources are IT. The rest are non-IT. That dilutes what we're trying to go to market with. So they came back and said, yeah, this is a problem. And I said, okay, so what are you telling us? And they said, well, we can't buy you based on the resources you have working for you. And I said, oh, okay. So the deal fell apart, and we were back to basically just running our staffing business. And I was quietly a little relieved because I wasn't super keen to sell, but at the same time, I knew it was kind of devastating for Keith, because we'd gone through all this process now, and here we are back without a deal in place. So we had a heart-to-heart, Keith and I, and we said, look, why don't we can do one of two things. We can go back to the Americans and see what they say, or we can just dig in and go for another 2-3 years and then maybe see what the market looks like then. I'm good either way, but I don't think we want to start shopping ourselves around. We've had these 2 buyers interested, so let's if we're not going to talk to the Americans, let's just keep going. And so he said, well, let's see what they say. So I ate a little crow and called the
tail between your legs a little.
Yeah, a little bit, but I didn't want to weaken the position. So I went back and I said, hey, I just want to let you know that the deal we were working on fell through. It fell through for these reasons. We're happy to go back and start digging our heels in and growing for another 2 to 3 years. But since we went down the path with you, if you are interested in revisiting, we're open to a discussion. Let me know. Good either way. And they came back and said, yeah, let's chat. And again, they were right back at the table and ready to do a deal. So that's basically how it happened.
What was the difference in their posture, their offer, the second time through?
I actually had tried to negotiate higher, but the reality was it was 3 months later and we'd grown as a company. We'd continued to add headcount, and I believe the company was more valuable. And I sort of laid out a business case to negotiate a higher offer, but they came back and said, based on our initial offer and the earnout targets, I mean, the way we look at it is you're just that much closer to your earnout targets. And so the offer we made you is still a very good one. It just gives you more peace of mind that you'll hit that earnout target and you'll make the full amount of the offer. And so that made sense to us. And so we didn't push our luck too much further. We agreed to sign the LOI based on the terms they put forward.
And what proportion was it risk in and earn out? Like how was that structured?
75-25.
So 75 up front, 25 at risk in and earn out. And 2-year earn out?
2-year earn out. That's right. So the first milestone will be at the end of this calendar year. And then we have another one at the end of 2026.
And what was Keith's reaction to the offer? Because it sounds like, he's sort of on the hook to hit the earnout. Like it seems like it's sort of in his.
Yeah, it is. It is for sure. He feels supremely confident. I trust his judgment because he's very close to the market and what's going on out there and the nature of our clients. And I said to him, if you don't feel we can hit these earnout targets, I don't feel like it's the best deal for us. And he came back and said, look, I think we're going to hit these targets. So I give you my commitment that we will. And I said, okay, well, let's go then. Here we are halfway through the first year. And I think we're basically a lock to hit the first year earnout. Year 2 is obviously a little harder to predict, that far in the future. There's macroeconomic factors that come into play that we have no control over. But I think we'll be in good shape to achieve it.
And for folks who haven't been through an earnout, I'm sure they'd be curious to know how it's structured. Is it all or nothing on the second year? It sounds like there might be a 1-year payment as well and a 2-year payment.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's divided into.
Basically, you have to hit a minimum threshold and you get X amount of cash if you hit that. And then you get an increase on that amount based on milestones above the minimum. So And the second year round has no cap on it. So actually, I mean, we could just grow exponentially, and it will benefit us. So I like that aspect of it too, is that it doesn't cap what we can do over the earn out period. We get rewarded for every piece of it. So Keith and the team are all in on trying to make it happen, which is great.
How did so describe closing day for me when this deal went down and the lawyer said, yeah, we're good. What was that like?
Well, there was an interesting caveat that happened. Basically the day before closing, we were closing on a Monday, like the first Monday in February. But the Friday or Thursday before the close, when everything was basically signed and we were just at that point waiting for wire transfers to hit on Monday, Mr. Trump decided to slap a bunch of tariffs across the board on Canada over the weekend. And it really looked scary for us because we thought, oh my gosh, these guys haven't closed the deal yet. These tariffs just hit and nobody knows what the impacts of these are going to be. It was just a lot of hand wringing and worrying over the weekend about, boy, this could fall apart based on, what's just happened here. This is big news. And certainly, Monday came and the morning came, then the afternoon came and we hadn't heard anything. And we were like, oh boy, this is probably going to fall apart. But towards the end of the business day, everything finally made its way through. And we learned afterward, we had a closing dinner with the buyers, and they told us, we had a lot of conversations over the weekend about what is the impact of these tariffs going to be, and does it make sense to be buying a Canadian company right now, and what does this look like? So it really was in the balance, but they ended up going through with it. And I guess as we've seen, the tariffs haven't been as dramatic an impact yet. Time will tell, of course, but
sure,
business has been solid ever since. And so it looks like it was a good deal for both parties.
Yeah, it sounds like it for sure, but not without a few sweaty palm moments in those sort of 8 hours after opening business on Monday morning.
Exactly.
That's wild. That's wild. What was, you've been through two significant exits. Redwood was a significant exit, and now Core. How would you describe the difference between the first and the second in terms of your, how it impacted you emotionally, physically, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there were a couple of nuances to the deals that were different that certainly touch on as well. But I mean, going through my first exit, I could certainly relate to Keith's desire to do it because you start something, you build it. It's a frenetic, all encompassing, emotional ride, keeping it together, and making it successful and thrive and keep continuing to grow. So I was at the point where I was starting to feel a little bit of burnout, and we'd had such a good run with Redwood. And again, I'd had a young family. I still had a mortgage. I wanted to lock in a lifestyle for myself as well. So I had all those elements at play for my decision to sell Redwood. And even though it was different for me at Core, I certainly could relate to Keith. He was basically where I was when I sold Redwood. So I related to his desires and emotions. And, I wasn't about to stand in the way of that. The differences in the deals it was interesting. The first deal I did with Redwood, we sold and we kept the balance sheet on that deal, and there was no earnout.
Sorry, what does it mean to keep the balance sheet? I don't know what you mean by that.
Yeah. So what I mean is with the deal with Core, we had to leave some working capital in the business. So net working capital, which is an element of a lot of transactions, which I've now come to learn. And so the Redwood deal was clean. There was no earnout. It was basically all cash up front, a little bit of a trailer on the payouts just to make sure we didn't violate our non-competes or any of that sort of thing. And that was a 2-year non-compete. But this deal was different in that there was a net working capital calculation, which effectively means we had to leave enough cash in the business for it to sustain itself going forward. And as you can imagine, there's, a fair amount of capital required to pay these contractors on an ongoing basis. So, we'd accumulated a lot of cash, but we had to leave a lot of cash in the business. So I had to factor that into the overall sale and purchase price because, cash is cash. And if I'm leaving you $4 million of my cash in the business, well, I have to really mentally take that off the purchase price because
Was it really that much?
It was close. It was high. And the frustrating part for me was I wanted to get an exact number of what this net working capital number was. Cause at the end of the day, it's like, what are we getting in our pockets for this sale? Like, what is the exact number? And I wanted some cost certainty on that. And so I'd gone back and forth with our accountants, with our lawyers, and just trying to nail down this number. And I just kept getting, different answers on how it was. Well, there's, I guess, somewhat of a formula, but there's still some nuances to it that make it really difficult to ascertain what an exact number is at close because it's a moving target. Your net working capital can fluctuate from month to month and seasonality and all these different factors. And so ultimately, we had to make a best guesstimate about what the net working capital adjustment would be at close. And then there's a true up that happens 90 days later based on the estimate. And so we got our accountant to effectively give us an estimate and we incorporated that in the deal. So we basically peeled out as much cash of the bank accounts that we thought we could, that was excess working capital. But ultimately, the estimate was off by a considerable amount. And so, 90 days later, they came back and said, hey, you overestimated and we need an adjustment of several $100,000. And it's like, geez, this is what I wanted to avoid was this, surprise after the deal's done. But here we are now. And so, it kind of was a bit of a stinger on the back end. It's like, I didn't want this to happen, but it did. Effectively, we just miscalculated what the net working capital is. And I guess it's difficult to ascertain exactly what that number is when you've got a business that fluctuates on revenues month to month. So,
yeah, I've heard it. I've described it myself as the second most important number on a term sheet. Every entrepreneur is going to go immediately to like, what's the price you're going to pay me for my business? But the second most important number, and in your case, it was significant, was the working capital calculation because it's the money you have to leave in your company. Most business owners say, well, that's my money. I mean, like, I'm going to take that out, obviously, when I hand over the keys. But most acquirers say, no, that's money that we need to run the business. And so trying to figure out, the actual amount that you need to leave in the business.
So I'd say an accountant is at least as important as your lawyers in the transaction because there is a lot of calculating that has to happen to properly evaluate a deal. So don't shortchange the importance of accountants in a deal process.
Yeah, for sure. But I can imagine intellectually it was hard for you because you'd already had a financial win, right? So for you, as you mentioned earlier, this was a cash flow business. This allowed you to avoid living off your capital for the rest of your life. Like you were getting dividends and this was all great. That's right. So all of a sudden you go from like a nice little a steady gravy train of dividends effectively to, oh, wait a minute. I got to, like all that money that I thought was quote mine is now, I'd imagine it would be psychologically challenging.
It is, especially because it was so different from the first deal I did. So it was just a learning experience for me as well. So that's
yeah. But what about intellectually? Like we spent a lot of time. We do this after the deal series on this show, which is talking to entrepreneurs about the psychological impact, both good and bad, of selling your company. Some of the themes that we hear is that it is. It's obviously a very high moment when the check clears, and then it can also be followed by a really challenging psychological moment. I guess I'd imagine Redwood for you was where you experienced that the majority of that sort of roller coaster. But I'm putting words in your mouth at this point. Is any of that resonating for you?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, with Redwood, because it was like an all-in endeavor. It consumed my life for 7 years building that. To go from running 100 miles an hour to not running at all. It was a bit of a shock to the system. And so with Core, because I was really, as you know, not as actively involved, it didn't change my life that much from a sort of day-to-day routine when the deal closed. It was definitely a lot easier this time around. So emotionally, I was fine with it. I was knew what I would sort of likely to experience, having gone through it before. So I had the benefit of that sort of wisdom, having gone through it previously. So it was still exciting though, and it was really exciting for me to experience it through Keith's eyes and have him get his first exit under his belt. And I thought that was just wonderful for him and his family, and I'm really happy and proud of what he's brought to the table to build that company, and he's remained on, and he's still driving it forward. And I went in for the transition meeting with the new owners when we announced to the team. So we got our team of 30 people down in our Toronto office headquarters, and then the new 724 owners came in, and I popped in as well, and sort of was there for the handoff meeting. And then people started getting back to work, and I was like, okay, I guess my business here is done. So I went over to the new owners. I said, hey, you know where to find me. You got my number. I'm here on call if you need anything. You're in great hands with Keith. And if anything comes up, just let me know. And that was it. I basically walked out of the office and haven't looked back. I mean, I still talk to Keith on occasion, but it's been just kind of, that's it for me. So,
but I want to dig in a bit more, because when you sell Redwood, in your own admission, you had a mortgage. So there's a huge lifestyle bump that you get, right? When you have a big liquidity event, you can get a mortgage, and you're not worried about money stuff anymore. So that's a huge impact, right?
Definitely.
And then I'm imagining you don't get the same sort of psychological lift by another tranche of wealth that really isn't going to move your lifestyle measurably.
That's right. No, you don't. I mean, I am in a better position, no doubt, financially. And I guess I have the optionality now to really, I'm a little older, I'm 52 now. So I have the optionality to not work again. And that's a nice position to be in. I guess I could have had that after the Redwood exit, but now I have obviously a higher standard of living now, because I have, I basically doubled my net worth with this exit. So, life is good. And it's kind of what I designed for myself. I didn't want to be somebody who had to go in and clock a 9 to 5 in my 50s. I wanted to have the freedom to do what I want when I want, and sort of, I've achieved that now. So I like to golf. I like to travel, and I keep busy. So, but I do also love business. And so I'm definitely keeping my eyes open for future opportunities as well.
Yeah. Buy yourself any trophies?
Not yet. No, I haven't actually. I've done a lot of traveling. So I honestly, I'm not a huge materialistic kind of person. I find materialistic things kind of weigh me down a little bit. I'm a simple person. As I said, I love golf. I love traveling. So those are more experiential type of rewards.
Most exotic place you've visited since selling?
I went to Iceland a few weeks ago. I went to Costa Rica. I went to St. Lucia. I went to Dominican Republic. I like my warm destinations in the winter. We're planning a trip to Spain in the fall, my wife and I. So we'll
awesome.
Get going as well. Yeah.
I'm so happy for you. So if people wanted to reach out and sort of connect with you, what's the best way for folks to do that?
I would say LinkedIn. My LinkedIn profile's there. I'm totally interested and open in exploring new ventures. Again, I think the right fit for me would be somebody who's got a good idea, a lot of energy, self-motivated, driven, and I can bring a lot of experience, wisdom, capital to the equation, and I can roll up my sleeves. Like, it's not like I don't want to do anything, but definitely somebody who's really driven would be a good fit. And, it could be any idea. I'm open to a myriad of different opportunities. There's so much going on in the world. AI is emerging. There's businesses on that front. And a lot of different opportunities. So yeah, I'm open to hearing from folks with good ideas who are looking for a good business partner.
We will put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes at builttosell.com. Ryan Atkinson, thanks for doing this.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Have a great day.